The cameras were rolling, the studio lights blinding, and the hum of anticipation filled every corner of the late night with Seth Meyers' set. Millions of viewers around the world had tuned in for a show that promised celebrity banter and casual laughs. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was about to happen. In the very first seconds of the interview, Dakota Fanning leaned forward, her gaze steady, her smile deceptively calm. And then the words came. "You're a fake Duchess," she said. Just like that. A single line, but it hit harder than any scandal Meghan Markle had faced in her years under the relentless spotlight. The studio froze. The audience gasped. Social media would erupt within minutes. And in that moment, everything about Meghan's carefully crafted persona seemed to wobble under the weight of a truth she couldn't control. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. How does someone go from being the adored royal of the world to the subject of public humiliation in less than 10 seconds? How does Hollywood's golden girl manage to dismantle centuries of royal polish with a few cleverly chosen words? This was not just a simple celebrity roast. It was a collision of two worlds, the pristine, protocol-driven universe of royalty and the raw, unfiltered authenticity of Hollywood. And at the center of it all was Meghan, caught in the crossfire, unsure how to respond, trapped in a performance she had mastered for years, only to realize that sometimes fame is as fragile as the finest porcelain. For decades, Meghan had walked the world on a tightrope. Her every move was analyzed, dissected, and broadcast. From red carpets to charity galas, every smile, every gesture, every word she uttered became fodder for the tabloids, the talk shows, and millions of social media commentators ready to cast judgment. She had learned the rules of the game: grace under pressure, poise under scrutiny, charm as armor against the relentless lens of the camera. But Dakota Fanning, child star turned formidable actress, had entered this equation with an unspoken agenda. There was no filter, no political correctness, no careful consideration of optics. Just a clear, piercing observation, delivered in a way that cut deeper than any headline or whispered rumor ever could. And here's the thing. People were already buzzing. The story had leaked before the episode even aired in full, the clips circulating in a frenzy. Social media was ablaze with fans trying to decipher Dakota's intentions, dissect Meghan's reaction, and predict the aftermath. Was it playful teasing? Or a calculated public takedown? People were asking themselves, did Meghan actually deserve the criticism? Or was she simply a victim of circumstance, caught between two worlds that would never fully accept her? And the most pressing question of all lingered: how would Meghan recover from this moment, both publicly and personally, when the world was watching every reaction, every nuance, every flinch? You might be thinking, wasn't Meghan prepared for scrutiny? After all, she had been in the public eye long enough to weather storms, to respond strategically, to navigate the choppy waters of fame and royalty with skill. But this was different. Dakota wasn't a journalist asking pointed questions. She wasn't a host leading a discussion with subtle probes. She was a peer, a fellow celebrity, someone with the power to dismantle public image with humor, sarcasm, and confidence. And she did it flawlessly. Every eyebrow raise, every inflection, every pause had been calculated. Or maybe it was instinct, but the result was the same. Meghan's royal armor, polished over decades, suddenly looked brittle, fragile, vulnerable. The tension was palpable in the studio. Cameras panned across the audience, capturing reactions that ranged from shocked laughter to stunned silence. Seth Meyers, usually quick with a witty remark, appeared momentarily speechless. The perfect host in a room full of high-profile guests, trained to manage chaos and deflect tension, found himself navigating a delicate balance. Should he intervene? Should he laugh along? Or should he let the moment unfold naturally, knowing that sometimes raw authenticity on television is the most powerful form of entertainment? The viewers at home didn't need guidance. They were hooked. The clip went viral before the credits even rolled. Comments poured in, some mocking Meghan, others cheering Dakota, many simply frozen in disbelief. The conversation wasn't just about what was said. It was about what it represented: a crack in the veneer of celebrity, a glimpse behind the curtain, and the undeniable human vulnerability of a woman who had been expected to be perfect at all times. And yet, this wasn't just about humiliation. There was an almost poetic irony to the moment. Dakota, who had grown up in the intense glare of Hollywood cameras, understood the fragility of public perception. She knew that every word, every smile, every glance could become part of a narrative she couldn't fully control. Perhaps that's why the jab landed with such precision. It wasn't mean-spirited. It was brutally honest, sharply observed, and wrapped in the veneer of charm and humor that made it digestible for a live audience. And the irony? Meghan, despite years of experience with media scrutiny and public opinion, had no immediate defense. She had been outmaneuvered in real time, and the result was as fascinating as it was shocking. Let's take a step back and consider the layers here. This wasn't just a clash between two personalities. It was a collision of entire worlds. Meghan represented centuries of tradition, royal expectations, and media fascination with monarchy. Dakota embodied the modern celebrity. Candid, quick-witted, and unafraid to speak truths that others might sugarcoat. The tension wasn't personal alone. It was cultural, societal, almost symbolic. Millions were watching, not just for entertainment, but to see a microcosm of two worlds colliding, and to witness how one person would respond when confronted so publicly with their authenticity, or lack thereof. And if you think the story stops at the punchline, you would be wrong. Because in the minutes and hours following that single phrase, the narrative spiraled. Leaks, insider commentary, and social media speculation created a web of intrigue. Journalists scrambled to contextualize the exchange. Analysts debated whether Meghan's response was calculated or instinctual. Celebrity bloggers dissected every movement, every expression. And viewers? They were hooked, waiting for the fallout, desperate for the next twist, the next revelation that would either vindicate Meghan or prove that Dakota had struck a nerve in a way that few had dared to before. The drama wasn't just happening on screen. It was playing out in real time across every platform, from Twitter to TikTok to Instagram stories, each one amplifying the stakes, the tension, and the public's fascination. So, why does this story matter now? Because it's more than a moment of embarrassment or a viral clip. It's a reflection of public perception, the thin line between fame and scrutiny, and the relentless gaze of a global audience that expects perfection from people who are inherently human. Meghan Markle, once celebrated as a modern Duchess breaking barriers, faced a new type of challenge. Authenticity exposed, vulnerabilities laid bare, and public judgment delivered in a single, unforgettable line. Dakota Fanning had done something that few had dared to attempt. She had punctured the polished armor of royalty, using charm, timing, and wit as her weapon. And in doing so, she set the stage for a chain reaction that would ripple across media, celebrity culture, and public discourse for weeks, months, and perhaps even years. But here's the thing. While the moment itself was shocking, it was only the beginning. What happened after the cameras stopped rolling, behind the scenes, is where the real story unfolds. Because public humiliation on live television is one thing. The unseen fallout, the whispered conversations, the strategic phone calls, the damage control meetings. Those are the moments that shape legacies, reputations, and careers. And trust me, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. This is a story about fame, power, vulnerability, and the unexpected moments that can redefine public perception in an instant. It's about a Duchess confronted with a truth she couldn't control and a Hollywood star wielding words with precision. It's about what happens when two worlds collide in a space designed for entertainment and the fallout that follows. And as you watch, read, or listen, ask yourself, if you were in Meghan's shoes, could you maintain your composure? Could you recover from a public humiliation of this magnitude? Or would you crumble under the weight of a single line that exposes something you thought no one could see? The introduction sets the stage for a story that will unfold in shocking, dramatic, and emotionally gripping ways. We will go deeper, chapter by chapter, examining not only the words spoken but the intentions behind them, the reactions that followed, and the long-term impact on Meghan Markle, Dakota Fanning, and the public at large. Every chapter will peel back another layer of this drama, revealing secrets, tensions, and revelations that were hidden from public view. And with every word, you'll feel the tension, the the stakes, and the raw human emotion that makes this story impossible to turn away from. But just when you think you understand the scope of what happened that night, the next layer emerges. One that makes you question everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle, Hollywood, and the fragile line between admiration and humiliation. And that, my friends, is where our story truly begins. What happens when two worlds collide? The glittering, fast-paced world of Hollywood and the meticulous, tradition-bound universe of royalty. Most people imagine polite pleasantries, measured smiles, and a controlled dance of words. But that night, the collision was anything but polite. It was explosive, and it began the instant Dakota Fanning entered the studio, radiant, composed, and ready. She wasn't just another guest on Late Night with Seth Meyers. She was a force of nature, someone whose presence alone could make the room shift. And Meghan? She was walking in with her usual polished smile, posture perfect, crown, figurative, not literal, held high, unaware that the evening would test everything she believed about her public persona. From the moment she stepped onto the stage, Meghan felt it. There was a subtle energy in the air, a tension you couldn't put into words, but it pressed against the chest like a physical weight. Dakota's gaze met hers briefly, a flicker of recognition, a spark of understanding, and in that fleeting moment, the stage was set. The audience, sensing something electric, leaned in, anticipation thick enough to taste. They didn't yet know why, but everyone could feel that this was no ordinary interview. There was something raw beneath the laughter, something genuine, unfiltered, and potentially catastrophic for someone whose life had been constructed around control. Let's rewind for a moment. Consider the stakes. Meghan Markle had become a public figure through a combination of charisma, strategic visibility, and, yes, royal marriage. Every glance, every gesture, every syllable she uttered was catalogued, judged, and consumed by millions. She understood scrutiny. She thrived under it. At least, she thought she did. But Dakota Fanning was different. Dakota had grown up in the exact same world, Hollywood, but without the cushion of royalty. She understood authenticity, the brutal power of words, and the subtle art of exposing truth in moments where no one expected it. To Dakota, this was not an attack, it was a demonstration. A test of composure, of control, and ultimately, of public perception. And that's when the first words flew, a casual, deceptively simple observation that would echo for months. "You're a fake Duchess," Dakota said, voice calm, almost conversational. But the delivery? Ruthless. It was precise, sharp, impossible to ignore. And for the first time, Meghan wasn't performing for the cameras. She was reacting in real time, instinctively, viscerally. A flicker of surprise, a pause, a tightening of the jaw. The words weren't just heard, they were felt. Across the studio, in the seats, behind the cameras, in homes across the nation, the statement landed like a hammer. People laughed nervously. Some gasped. Others leaned closer, sensing they were witnessing an unscripted crack in the facade of celebrity. Why did it hit so hard? Because it wasn't random. Dakota had studied Meghan, not like a stalker, not obsessively, but as someone who understood public image, reputation, and the subtle cues that reveal cracks behind polished veneers. She knew the world saw Meghan as poised, polished, almost untouchable, and she wanted to expose the human beneath the crown, the person behind the carefully constructed image. There's something primal about that kind of public exposure, something that can make an audience lean in and hold its breath. And in that instant, the audience was silent, collectively holding its breath, waiting for Meghan to respond. And she did, but not in the way most people expected. Meghan's response was immediate, but it wasn't a verbal counterattack. It was a subtle shift, a quick intake of breath, a tightening of her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head as if trying to regain control over a situation that had momentarily slipped. Her eyes flicked to Seth Meyers, seeking guidance, an anchor, or perhaps some buffer. Seth, trained for moments like this, offered a tight-lipped smile, a subtle shrug. He didn't intervene directly, but his reaction was a signal to both the audience and Meghan. This is live, this is real, and you'll have to navigate it yourself. And this is where the emotional tension spiked. Because the audience didn't just see the interaction, they saw the contrast. On one side was Dakota Fanning, youthful, poised, confident, and unafraid. On the other side, Meghan Markle. Elegant, composed, but suddenly vulnerable, human in a way that millions rarely got to witness. It was a rare moment of authenticity, and for some viewers, it was uncomfortable, even shocking. How often does a public figure of Meghan's stature appear vulnerable on a global stage? And what does it mean for someone who has built their public life on control, image, and perception? The studio itself seemed to shrink, the lights growing brighter, as if highlighting every imperfection, every subtle reaction. Behind the cameras, producers whispered, teleprompters clicked, and crew members held their breaths. The moment wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a psychological battle, a duel fought in micro-expressions, body language, and audience perception. Dakota understood it. Meghan, for a brief period, experienced it. And the world, as viewers at home or online, were powerless to look away. Let's pause and consider this. What does it mean to be humiliated on live television, not through outright insult, but through a precise, devastating observation? How do you recover when the person delivering the critique isn't a journalist, a pundit, or even a critic, but appear in your own public sphere? Meghan had faced criticism before. Headlines, interviews, leaks, and social media attacks were part of her life. But this was different. This wasn't mediated. It wasn't filtered. It was delivered with a clarity and precision that made it undeniable, and that forced her to confront, in real time, the fragility of public perception. The tension didn't stop there. Every word Dakota spoke, every small gesture, was magnified. And as Meghan began to respond, both verbally and through her carefully measured expressions, the room felt like it held its breath collectively. The subtle nuances were everything. A pause, a tilt of the head, a fleeting smile, a slight tightening of the lips. All of it was broadcast, consumed, and analyzed in real time. Social media wouldn't wait for the show to end. Clips were already circulating, people commenting, sharing, debating. Memes were being born within minutes. And in that moment, Meghan's polished image collided with reality, and the collision was spectacular. Here's a twist most people don't consider. Dakota's approach was almost surgical. She didn't just attack Meghan personally. She attacked the mythology around her. The public image that Meghan had spent years cultivating was suddenly questioned. What does it mean to be a real Duchess in the eyes of the public? And who gets to decide authenticity? Dakota didn't give Meghan time to explain. She didn't pause for effect. She delivered her observation, sharp, undeniable, and then leaned back, allowing the silence to amplify the impact. And in that silence, everyone in the room, and millions at home, felt the weight of the words and wondered how Meghan would reclaim control, or if she even could. The stakes were even higher because this wasn't just about Meghan's pride. This was about public perception, about narrative control, and about the power dynamics between Hollywood and royalty. Dakota Fanning, a figure known for her intelligence, poise, and candor, had positioned herself as the arbiter of truth in that room, and Meghan had little room to maneuver. The audience sensed it. Social media sensed it. Even Seth Meyers, for all his experience, had to navigate a delicate balance between humor and tension, between protecting his guest and allowing the moment to unfold naturally. And as the first segment of the show drew to a close, the question hung in the air like an electric current. How would Meghan respond? Would she retreat behind the armor of her public persona, recalibrate, and fight back with measured charm? Or would the moment crack her, exposing vulnerabilities she had meticulously hidden from the world? The answer would come, but not yet. First, the audience had to experience the fallout, minute by minute, expression by expression, as the collision of Hollywood and royalty continued to unfold in ways no one could have anticipated. What makes this moment unforgettable is that it captures something universal, the vulnerability of perfection under scrutiny. Meghan had been taught to present an image, to control the narrative, to be flawless. Dakota reminded her, and the world, that no one is immune to exposure, that a single word, perfectly timed, can pierce the carefully constructed armor of celebrity. And that piercing? It left an indelible mark, both for Meghan and for every viewer witnessing it. But the story doesn't end here. Because what happened in that room, the tension, the glance, the unspoken war of words, was only the beginning. What followed, off camera, in whispered exchanges, private conversations, and the rapid-fire analysis of social media would define the rest of the evening and, in some ways, reshape the narrative around Meghan Markle forever. And that, my friends, is exactly where our next chapter begins. It started like any other late-night chat. Light laughter, casual banter, the kind of conversation designed to ease viewers into a comfortable rhythm. But everyone in the room could feel it. Something was off. The air was thick with tension. Subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in body language hinted at a battle that no one had prepared for. And then, Dakota leaned forward, that faint, knowing smile on her face, and the tone of the conversation began to change. What seemed playful on the surface carried an undercurrent of something sharper, something designed to pierce the polish and expose what lay beneath. You have to understand, this wasn't the usual celebrity teasing, the back-and-forth banter that Seth Meyers was known for. This was different. Dakota had that rare ability to combine charm with precision. Each word, each pause, each carefully delivered line was a scalpel cutting through carefully maintained facades. And Meghan, for all her experience in navigating the spotlight, immediately felt the weight of it. Her smile, usually a shield, was now a fragile mask, threatened by the subtle but unmistakable power of observation. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in collectively. What would happen next? Would Meghan respond with her practiced grace, her usual eloquence, or would the sudden pressure cause her carefully maintained composure to crack? Dakota, calm, poised, yet undeniably commanding, spoke with a casual ease that belied the impact of her words. Each phrase was a calculated strike, a way to highlight contradictions, to poke at insecurities, to draw attention to the cracks in a persona that had been polished for public consumption. People always expect so much from you, Dakota said, voice smooth, almost conversational. A duchess, a celebrity, a humanitarian. How do you keep it all up without slipping? It was a question, yes, but it was also an observation, a subtle suggestion that the weight of expectation was visible in Meghan's demeanor. The words themselves were innocent enough, but the delivery, the timing, the way Dakota tilted her head and fixed her gaze, made it impossible to ignore. Every eye in the studio caught the tension, the unspoken challenge, the silent dare, respond or falter. And Meghan did respond, but her reaction was layered, complex, and telling. A small shift in posture, a fleeting, controlled smile, a brief hesitation before speaking. These were micro-expressions that carried volumes. Every word she uttered, every inflection, every carefully measured pause revealed the internal negotiation happening behind the polished exterior. Was she calculating her next move? Gauging the audience reaction? Trying to regain control in real time? Or simply reacting instinctively to a jab she didn't see coming? The answer, for viewers, was part of the drama, part of the tension that made the moment unforgettable. Seth Meyers, meanwhile, was caught in an unusual position. Usually, he guided conversations, softened blows, and ensured that no guest was left vulnerable. But this wasn't just any guest interaction. Dakota's approach had shifted the dynamic completely. She wasn't just delivering lines for laughs. She was testing boundaries, exploring uncharted territory, and subtly challenging Meghan's public persona. Seth's role became that of a mediator, trying to maintain balance without undermining the energy, without diluting the impact of a moment that was already electric. What followed next was a masterclass in subtlety and precision. Dakota didn't need to shout, didn't need to raise her voice. Her words were carefully crafted, delivered with a calmness that made the sting sharper. Each phrase hinted at truths that were uncomfortable, contradictions that Meghan had long managed to keep hidden, and realities that the public often ignored. Sometimes it feels like people only see the title, Dakota said, voice low, but audible enough for every microphone to pick up. Not the person behind it. Do you ever feel that? It was casual, polite even, but the implication was clear. The audience knew the weight of the observation. Meghan, visibly processing, couldn't escape it. And then came the laugh, or rather, the carefully measured pause that implied it. Dakota's subtle smile, a tilt of her head, was enough to convey amusement at the tension she had created. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it was undeniably effective. It created a space where the audience could feel the power dynamic in real time, the the balance shifting between two women whose lives were shaped by public scrutiny, but who approached it in vastly different ways. One relied on polish, tradition, and carefully curated image. The other relied on instinct, authenticity, and the ability to expose truth without pretense. The audience picked up on it instantly. Social media would later explode with clips of this exact moment. The pause, the glance, the smile, the subtle challenge. Fans dissected every expression, analyzed every inflection, and debated the implications for days afterward. What Dakota had done wasn't just comedic or casual. It was a strategic, almost surgical act of public observation, executed with precision. And Meghan, for the first time in what seemed like years, had no script, no teleprompter, no shield. She had to navigate the moment as it unfolded, relying solely on instinct, intellect, and the ability to maintain composure under immense pressure. And here's the twist. The power of this exchange didn't come from what was said alone. It came from what wasn't said. The subtle implications, the unspoken truths, the quiet observations. These were what made the moment so resonant. Meghan's public image, carefully cultivated over years, suddenly felt fragile. Dakota's words illuminated the human vulnerabilities beneath the polished exterior. And the audience, both in the studio and at home, was captivated. They were witnessing something rare, a collision of worlds where words became weapons, observation became strategy, and authenticity collided with expectation in real time. But it wasn't just about vulnerability. It was about perception. Dakota, with her calm, poised delivery, controlled the narrative in a way that few had managed with Meghan. She didn't need to raise her voice or use dramatic gestures. A glance, a pause, a carefully placed phrase was enough to make the audience, and Meghan, feel the impact. It was a subtle but devastating form of power, a reminder that influence often lies not in what is shouted, but in what is carefully observed, strategically articulated, and deliberately implied. The tension continued to build. Seth Meyers, now fully aware of the electric energy, tried to navigate the unfolding drama without disrupting it. He inserted a light joke, a casual segue, but even his humor couldn't fully diffuse the underlying tension. The audience was too aware, too invested, too captivated by the subtle battle taking place before them. Every micro-expression, every gesture, every inflection was magnified under the unforgiving lights of the studio and the relentless gaze of millions of viewers watching at home. And just when it seemed that Meghan had regained a fragment of control, Dakota shifted the conversation ever so slightly, leaning in with a question that appeared innocent but carried layers of implication. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her voice calm but deliberate, "if people love the person or just the idea of the title?" It was a simple question, but it landed like a thunderclap. The room grew quiet. Meghan blinked, processing. The audience leaned forward, captivated. And the implications? They were seismic. Because what Dakota had done was more than just a jab. It was a revelation. She exposed a truth that was uncomfortable but undeniable. In a world obsessed with image, fame, and public perception, authenticity is a rare commodity. And Meghan, despite her intelligence, charisma, and experience, was confronted with the undeniable reality that titles, reputation, and carefully curated appearances can only shield you for so long. And as the first segment of the interview came to a close, the audience felt it. The moment was far from over. The tension wasn't resolved. The battle of perception had only just begun. Dakota's observations had pierced the surface, exposing vulnerabilities, raising questions, and setting the stage for a sequence of events that would captivate millions. Meghan had been tested, publicly and undeniably, and the outcome was anything but predictable. But what came next would escalate the tension even further. A moment that started as subtle observation was about to become a public spectacle, one that would leave Meghan scrambling for composure and social media in flames. And no one in that studio, not even Seth Meyers, could have anticipated just how far the storm would reach, or how deeply it would impact the narrative surrounding Meghan Markle and her carefully constructed world. It happened in a heartbeat. A single phrase. A single, devastating line that instantly turned a conversation into a spectacle. "You're a fake Duchess." The words were simple, almost casual, delivered by Dakota Fanning with a calm precision that made them impossible to ignore. Yet, the impact was anything but simple. In that instant, Meghan Markle's carefully curated image, years of public appearances, red carpet smiles, royal protocol, and strategic interviews, was challenged in the harshest way possible, live, on national television, with millions watching. The audience gasped. Some laughed nervously. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the fleeting flash of surprise across Meghan's face, the micro-expressions that no amount of training or public experience could completely mask. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her eyes darted briefly toward Seth Meyers as if seeking an anchor. And yet, Seth, seasoned as he was, could do little. The moment had already taken on a life of its own, fueled by tension, subtle power dynamics, and the electrifying charisma of Dakota Fanning. Why did those words sting so much? It wasn't just the accusation, it was the truth implied within them. Dakota wasn't yelling, mocking, or shrieking. She was observing, exposing, and delivering with the calm of someone who knows the power of words. To call Meghan a fake Duchess wasn't an insult, it was a revelation. It suggested that beneath the titles, the crowns, and the global media attention, there was something performative, something inauthentic, something constructed. And for Meghan, a woman who had built her public life around grace under pressure and polished perfection, it was a direct hit to the very foundation of her public identity. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Dakota leaned slightly forward, maintaining eye contact, her voice low but clear. The pause before the phrase was deliberate, a subtle invitation for the audience to brace themselves. And when the words finally fell, they didn't just land, they reverberated. In the studio, the sound of a stunned audience mixed with the quiet hum of cameras capturing every detail. Social media notifications pinged simultaneously as clips of the moment began to circulate, amplified, and dissected by millions within minutes. Meghan's reaction was a study in composure under fire. For a brief second, the mask she had perfected for public appearances wavered. A blink too long, a subtle shift in posture, a brief tightening of the lips. Each movement amplified by millions of cameras, millions of eyes, millions of judgments. It was the human beneath the crown, exposed in a way that felt intimate yet public, personal yet global. How often does someone of her stature confront such pointed observation in a way that strips away the gloss? Not often. And the power of that exposure? Immense. But what makes the moment unforgettable isn't just the delivery of the words, it's what came after. Dakota didn't stop at the statement. She followed it with a series of subtle, yet deliberate observations that compounded the impact. A tilt of the head, a soft chuckle, a gaze that lingered, just enough to challenge Meghan to respond. Each gesture was part of a strategy, intentional or instinctive, that heightened the tension. Every viewer watching at home could feel it. This wasn't casual teasing. This was a calculated exposure of vulnerability. And Meghan had to respond. She opened her mouth, but words seemed to falter. The rehearsed lines, the carefully constructed defenses, the training for public appearances, all of it momentarily failed her. In that instant, the human element took over. The doubt, the pressure, the realization that no shield, no title, no public support could completely protect her from an unexpected, incisive observation, came crashing down. Her pause spoke volumes, conveying more than words ever could. Audience members noticed the shift instantly. Some leaned forward, captivated by the tension. Some whispered to one another, analyzing the subtle micro-movements. Social media erupted simultaneously, with reactions ranging from outrage to admiration to shock. Memes were born, tweets circulated, and comments multiplied exponentially. People debated, was Dakota cruel or merely honest? Was Meghan's reaction evidence of insecurity or just shock at being confronted in such a stark, public way? And most importantly, who truly held the power in that room? Let's not forget Seth Meyers. The host, usually quick to interject, to soften blows, or to add humor, found himself momentarily powerless. He could guide the conversation. He could provide subtle comic relief. But the momentum, the narrative, the emotional stakes were entirely in Dakota's hands now. Every word, every glance, every pause she made carried weight, and the audience could feel it. This was no ordinary late-night banter. It was an exposure, an unmasking, a public exploration of authenticity versus image, and everyone watching knew it. But here's the thing. The brilliance of Dakota's approach lay not in outright humiliation. It was in the subtlety, the calm precision, the way she exposed a truth without overtly attacking, the way she held Meghan's gaze, maintaining composure while simultaneously delivering a message that pierced the veil of public perception. And for Meghan, the sting wasn't just in the words themselves, it was in what they revealed. The subtle implication that perhaps her image, her title, her public persona wasn't entirely authentic. That perhaps the world saw the idea of a duchess, not the person beneath it. And as Meghan struggled to regain composure, the tension only grew. The audience sensed the imbalance. The viewers at home felt it. Social media magnified it. Every pause, every flicker of emotion, every carefully measured movement was scrutinized, dissected, and amplified. The moment became less about a simple exchange between two people and more about a public spectacle, a performance within a performance, where control, image, and perception were in constant, delicate negotiation. There was also an irony in the timing. Dakota, someone who had grown up in Hollywood's unforgiving glare, understood the fragility of public image better than most. She knew how to expose, how to challenge, and how to do it with an elegance that left no one able to argue, refute, or escape. And she had chosen her words with precision, understanding the psychological weight they carried. To call Meghan a fake duchess was not just an insult. It was a revelation, a challenge, a spotlight thrown on vulnerability, authenticity, and the fragile nature of carefully constructed personas. The moment went beyond words. It became symbolic. It represented a collision of two worlds, Hollywood's candid, raw, unfiltered reality and royalty's polished, constrained, image-conscious existence. Meghan had navigated scrutiny before, yes. Headlines, interviews, paparazzi, even public scandals. But nothing had prepared her for this. An incisive observation delivered with charm, precision, and undeniable clarity, in a public forum, where millions were watching, and where no prepared response could fully shield her from exposure. And yet, the fallout hadn't even begun, because what Dakota had done on that stage was only the surface. Behind the scenes, whispers circulated. Producers, staff, and even Seth himself tried to anticipate the public reaction, to predict the narrative, to understand how this seemingly simple moment could have consequences that would ripple far beyond a single interview. Social media notifications began to explode in real time. Millions of clips shared, thousands of tweets debating, dissecting, and analyzing. And in the studio, Meghan was left to grapple with a realization that the impact of a single line, calm, measured, devastating, could redefine public perception in an instant. The moment became a case study in vulnerability, perception, and the unexpected power of words. A single phrase, delivered with precision and authenticity, had exposed a crack in the polished armor of royalty. And the public, whether in the studio or online, was captivated. They were witnessing not just an interview, but an unplanned psychological duel, a moment of exposure that few had ever seen before in such a high-profile context. And yet, as intense as it was, no one had anticipated what came next. The next exchange, the next glance, the next revelation that would escalate the tension to levels that would leave the entire audience, both in person and online, stunned. Because what happened after that phrase, fake duchess, would take the situation beyond embarrassment or social media commentary. It would become a full-blown spectacle, one that revealed more than just vulnerability. It would expose intentions, alliances, public perception, and human emotion in ways that no one could have predicted. And that, my friends, is where the next chapter begins. Have you ever watched someone try to navigate a storm in real time, knowing that any wrong move could make everything worse? That was Seth Meyers that night. For decades, he had mastered the art of hosting, balancing humor with sensitivity, steering conversations with precision, and ensuring that the chaos of live television never got the better of him. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what Dakota Fanning had just unleashed. And sitting across from Meghan Markle, watching the subtle shift in her composure, Seth suddenly realized that the storm wasn't something he could manage with a quick joke or a well-timed segue. This was raw, unpredictable, and electric. The moment Dakota called Meghan a fake Duchess didn't just shock Meghan. It shocked the entire room, including Seth. The pause that followed was palpable. Cameras swiveled to capture reactions. The audience's eyes widened, and somewhere deep in the control room, producers exchanged concerned glances. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Seth had two choices: intervene to lighten the mood or let the moment unfold naturally. Either choice carried risks. Step in too quickly, and he risked undermining Dakota's point, making her appear petty. Do nothing, and Meghan could crumble under the public scrutiny of millions of viewers watching in real time. He chose the tightrope. He offered a smile, subtle, calm, just enough to bridge the moment without interfering with the tension. But it was a calculated smile. It acknowledged the power of Dakota's words, validated Meghan's shock without openly siding with her, and kept the audience engaged without giving them a chance to look away. Every seasoned host knows that live television is as much about what isn't said as what is, and Seth leaned into that principle, trusting the moment to speak for itself. Yet the challenge was immense. Dakota had an uncanny ability to dominate the conversation without raising her voice. Every pause, every glance, every carefully crafted observation made Meghan appear both human and fragile at once. Seth had seen countless interviews where guests floundered, where tension simmered beneath the surface, but rarely had he witnessed such a precise collision of public persona and raw observation. It was like watching a perfectly executed chess game, played in microseconds, with every participant reacting instinctively. And then the audience began to respond. You could see it on camera: subtle shifts, murmurs, brief laughter, and wide-eyed stares. They were captivated, hooked, unable to look away. Social media, of course, was already exploding, and the live reactions only amplified the tension in the studio. Seth knew that the world outside was watching just as closely, dissecting every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. What Dakota had done, calling Meghan a fake Duchess, was more than just a line. It was a catalyst, a spark that ignited a wildfire of public scrutiny and debate. Seth's role in that moment was fascinating. He was simultaneously a mediator, a commentator, and a participant. He had to maintain control of the conversation without diminishing Dakota's impact or embarrassing Meghan further. And the way he did it was subtle but brilliant. He injected light humor, just enough to give Meghan a sliver of breathing room, a momentary pause to regain composure. A well-placed joke, a casual segue, a smile, the tools of a master host. But even Seth had to admit, internally, that these gestures could only do so much. The energy Dakota had generated was too strong, the tension too thick, the stakes too high. But here's where it gets interesting. Seth's reactions themselves became part of the drama. The way he shifted in his seat, the subtle raise of an eyebrow, the faint smirk, all captured by cameras and noticed by millions at home, added layers to the narrative. He wasn't just a passive observer. He was an active participant in a delicate dance. And the audience recognized it, subconsciously reading the room, sensing the interplay between Dakota's precision, Meghan's vulnerability, and Seth's balancing act. The host, usually a source of structure and calm, became a visible thread in the tension, a mediator walking an invisible tightrope. Meanwhile, Meghan was calculating her next move. She had faced scrutiny, public embarrassment, and social media backlash before, but this was different. The words had come from a peer, someone of comparable fame and visibility. Dakota hadn't asked a pointed question, hadn't critiqued her in an official capacity. She had simply observed, and in doing so, she had exposed a vulnerability that few had been able to see before. Meghan had to respond, and she had to do it live. Every word she considered, every subtle gesture, every pause carried monumental weight. Seth, ever perceptive, understood this dynamic perfectly. He subtly shifted the conversation, offering an opening that allowed Meghan to regain control without diminishing Dakota's observations. That's a fascinating point, he said, voice calm, neutral, almost conversational. How do you navigate expectations when the world is watching every step? It was a question designed to redirect, but not erase. To provide Meghan with a lifeline, a chance to assert herself, while maintaining the integrity of the tension. But Dakota wasn't done. She leaned in slightly, smiled faintly, and responded with the kind of clarity and subtle precision that left the audience frozen. "It's tricky," she said. "People assume so much, especially when someone has a title. But the truth isn't always what's presented. Isn't that right?" Every word was deliberate, layered, and pointed, and the implication was clear. Appearances can be deceiving, and even the most polished image can crack under observation. The room's energy shifted again. You could feel it in the subtle murmurs of the audience, the quick glances, the restrained laughter. The tension was cyclical, building, pausing, building again, like a tide that refused to recede. Seth had to constantly adjust to maintain the balance between humor and drama, commentary and observation, support and neutrality. And the brilliance of his approach lay in its subtlety. He never interrupted, never overpowered, but his timing, tone, and presence provided just enough structure to allow the moment to unfold with maximum impact. And yet, the stakes were higher than anyone in that room could have anticipated. Social media had already exploded. Clips of the fake Duchess line were circulating globally within minutes. Tweets dissected microexpressions, TikToks replayed the moment, and commentary flooded every platform imaginable. What Seth understood, instantly, was that the live studio was only half the story. The global audience was now an active participant in the drama, magnifying every gesture, every expression, and every word. His role had expanded from host to conductor, orchestrating a performance that was part theater, part psychological duel, part public spectacle. Seth's experience in live television became evident in how he handled the ensuing moments. He injected humor carefully, timing it perfectly to relieve tension without undermining the gravity of the exchange. He asked questions that allowed Meghan to respond without losing control of the narrative. He subtly highlighted points that emphasized the tension between perception and reality. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and essential to the unfolding drama. For the audience, it was a masterclass in live television navigation under high-pressure circumstances. And yet, even with Seth's skill, the moment remained volatile. Meghan's reactions were measured but visible. Dakota's poise was impeccable, and the audience, both in studio and at home, could feel the fragile balance. One misstep, one poorly chosen word, and the entire dynamic could collapse. And that possibility, the unpredictability of live human emotion under scrutiny, is what made the moment so compelling, so electrifying, so unforgettable. As the segment drew toward a brief commercial break, the tension hadn't diminished, it had intensified. The pause gave Meghan a moment to collect herself, but it also allowed the audience to speculate, to analyze, and to prepare for the next round of exchanges. Seth, poised and professional, maintained control, yet the unspoken understanding was clear. The true drama had only just begun. Dakota had set the stage, Meghan had reacted, and Seth's skillful guidance had kept the conversation alive without diffusing the tension. But what came next? Dakota's next line, her next observation, Meghan's reaction, and the audience's collective gasp would escalate everything beyond the subtle tension of observation into something far more public, far more viral, and far more consequential. And no one in that room, not even Seth, could have predicted just how far it would go. Have you ever had to defend yourself in front of millions of eyes, knowing that every word, every breath, every tiny gesture would be analyzed, judged, and dissected? That was Meghan Markle in that moment. The phrase, fake Duchess, had landed like a hammer, reverberating through the studio, through the cameras, and into homes around the world. It was one thing to face criticism in a controlled interview or through the filtered lens of social media. It was another entirely to have it delivered by someone your own age, a peer, someone who knew how to strike with precision and leave no room for polite deflection. Meghan's first instinct was control. Years of experience navigating the public eye, of mastering poise under pressure, told her exactly how to respond. Her lips parted slightly, forming the beginning of a smile designed to neutralize tension, to soften the impact, to reclaim authority. But the words stalled. Dakota Fanning was ready, calm, confident, observing, waiting. Every second that Meghan hesitated amplified the moment, making it impossible to retreat into rehearsed responses or polished statements. The audience sensed it instantly. Something was unfolding in real time that no one had rehearsed, no one had anticipated, and no one could ignore. Meghan spoke, cautiously at first, choosing each word as if placing chess pieces on a board that could collapse with a single misstep. I think everyone has their own perspective on what a duchess is, she said, voice measured, composed. And I try to do the best I can, given the responsibility and the role I have. Polished, graceful, and precise, but it wasn't enough. Dakota's presence, the subtle smile, the deliberate nods from the audience, created a pressure cooker where every syllable was examined, dissected, and judged. The words, although carefully chosen, lacked the punch required to deflect the observation entirely. And then, the unspoken scrutiny began. Meghan had long relied on public perception as armor. Titles, image, media strategy, they were her tools for protection. But in that moment, the scrutiny came in a form that couldn't be managed, raw observation. Dakota wasn't critiquing Meghan's charitable work, her public speeches, or her media appearances. She was exposing the human behind the crown. The persona that the world adored, envied, and critiqued simultaneously was being examined live, under the unforgiving gaze of millions. Meghan realized, almost immediately, that this was not just a verbal exchange, it was a psychological test. The audience could see the tension radiating off Meghan. A small tightening of the jaw, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a subtle shift of her posture. Each micro-expression amplified under the intense studio lights. It was as if the very ground beneath her carefully constructed image had shifted. And while she spoke, Dakota leaned in subtly, eyes bright, smile calm, observing, almost cataloging. Every movement Meghan made became part of the narrative Dakota was creating, a narrative that juxtaposed human vulnerability against carefully maintained perfection. Meghan's voice gained strength, her words forming more structure, more defense. Titles and perceptions are complex, she continued. But I try to act with integrity, with compassion, and with purpose in everything I do. And that's really what matters to me, how you use your platform to make a positive impact. The statement was strong, poised, and deliberate. It highlighted her accomplishments and reinforced her public persona. But the subtle challenge remained. Dakota didn't respond with aggression. She responded with observation, letting the words hang, giving the audience space to judge, to question, to feel the tension between image and perception. What makes this exchange extraordinary is how human it is. Millions of viewers were watching not just an interaction, but a raw, emotional moment where someone accustomed to control faced unpredictability head-on. Meghan's public image was polished, rehearsed, curated. But Dakota's presence created a space where authenticity, vulnerability, and human emotion could surface. And the subtle genius of Dakota's approach was that it didn't require shouting, confrontation, or provocation. The impact came from timing, presence, and the ability to observe, to expose, and to let the truth resonate naturally. The studio audience leaned in, captivated. Cameras captured every nuance. Social media exploded with real-time commentary. Clips circulated instantly, memes were created, and analysts debated the power dynamics in play. How had Dakota managed to simultaneously respect, challenge, and unmask? How had Meghan navigated the moment with a mixture of grace, poise, and vulnerability? And what did it say about the collision between celebrity, public perception, and human emotion? The tension escalated when Meghan attempted to pivot, using humor as a shield. "Well, I guess that's one way to start a conversation," she said lightly, voice steady, with a faint smile. A subtle joke, meant to deflect, to redirect attention, to regain control. But the effectiveness was limited. Dakota's calm observation, combined with the audience's awareness of the stakes, meant that humor alone could not neutralize the impact. It added a layer to the drama instead, irony. The audience could see Meghan trying, but the subtle imbalance remained. At the same time, Seth Meyers navigated a delicate dance. He laughed lightly, nodded subtly, and offered conversational bridges designed to give Meghan space to recover without disrupting the narrative tension. But even Seth knew the moment had surpassed the usual scope of late-night banter. This was no ordinary exchange. This was a collision of worlds, a study in public perception, and a psychological dance where every gesture, every glance, every word carried extraordinary weight. And yet, the subtle power of Dakota's approach lay in restraint. She did not attack further. She did not raise her voice or demand concessions. She observed, highlighted, and let the audience feel the impact of her words. The tension, in part, was psychological. The awareness that someone could observe so accurately, so honestly, and deliver truth in a way that exposed vulnerability without overt malice. Meghan's response, while poised and calculated, was measured against an opponent whose power came not from aggression, but from precision. It was a moment that illustrated something crucial about public image and perception. No amount of polish, preparation, or strategy can fully shield someone from real-time observation. Titles, accomplishments, and media narratives can create a facade, but human reaction, vulnerability, and the subtle observation of peers can pierce that armor instantly. Meghan's attempt to defend herself was strong, thoughtful, and poised, but the subtle truth of Dakota's words lingered, undeniable. As the conversation progressed, Meghan began to regain some control. She spoke with greater confidence, articulated her achievements, and reminded the audience of her humanitarian work, her public efforts, and her platform. But Dakota's presence remained an unspoken challenge, a reminder that the narrative was not entirely in Meghan's hands. Every audience member, in studio and at home, sensed the ongoing psychological duel, the interplay of confidence, authenticity, and exposure, each moment magnified under the global gaze. And just as Meghan seemed to stabilize, a subtle shift occurred. Dakota leaned slightly forward, eyes glinting with anticipation, and posed a question that was seemingly innocuous, but layered with implications. Do you think people see who you are, or the idea of who they want you to be? It was calm, almost casual, but the weight of the observation hung in the air. The audience felt it. Meghan's eyes flickered. The pause stretched. Cameras captured the tension, capturing the human struggle between image and reality, perception and authenticity. The moment was electric. Social media was already ablaze with speculation, commentary, and debate. Fans dissected every microexpression. Critics analyzed every phrase. Analysts debated the implications for Meghan's public image. And in the studio, the tension was palpable. Meghan had defended herself admirably, yes, but the observation remained. Dakota's words had not been refuted, only engaged. And that, my friends, is what made the moment unforgettable. Because the next moment, what Dakota said, how Meghan responded, and how the audience reacted, would escalate the drama even further. It would shift from a subtle observation to a viral spectacle, one that would dominate headlines, fuel social media debates, and leave viewers around the world asking the same question. How does a duchess recover from a challenge so precise, so public, and so undeniable? Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the cameras, beyond the polished smiles and perfectly lit stages? What most viewers see is just the surface, the glamour, the laughter, the witty exchanges. But the real story, the drama, the tension, all starts long before the lights go on. And that night, on Late Night with Seth Meyers, the tension had been simmering long before Meghan Markle and Dakota Fanning stepped onto the stage. Because Dakota didn't just appear prepared, she appeared strategically, almost surgically, ready to deliver her observation with precision, timing, and maximum impact. Few people understood just how much thought went into her appearance. Dakota, a former child star who had navigated Hollywood's unforgiving scrutiny from an early age, knew the power of presence, timing, and subtle observation. She understood how to balance charm with authority, wit with honesty, and precision with empathy. But she also knew that, sometimes, the truth needed to be delivered bluntly, and that the medium of live television amplified every microexpression, every pause, every subtle gesture. She wasn't there to humiliate. She was there to expose reality, to peel back the layers of perception, and to highlight authenticity, or the lack thereof. Weeks before the taping, Dakota's team had briefed her extensively. They had reviewed Meghan's past interviews, analyzed her red carpet appearances, and studied moments of public vulnerability. Not in a malicious way, but in the sense of understanding persona, narrative, and image. The goal wasn't to attack Meghan. It was to create a dialogue, to test the space where image met authenticity, where public perception collided with personal truth. And Dakota, with the poise of someone who had mastered this craft from childhood, knew how to navigate the delicate balance between insight and confrontation. It's fascinating, really, to consider the psychology at play. Dakota's intent was layered. On one level, she wanted to make a memorable appearance on a high-profile platform. That's standard in Hollywood. But on another level, she wanted to reveal a subtle truth about celebrity, fame, and public perception. She knew that Meghan, like so many public figures, relied heavily on the polished image projected to the world. And she also knew that even the most controlled persona could be disrupted by a carefully crafted, calm observation delivered at the perfect moment. In the hours leading up to the interview, Dakota had run through mental exercises. She rehearsed her posture, her eye contact, the cadence of her voice. She had envisioned the precise moment to lean in, the slight pause that would maximize impact, the micro-expression that would punctuate her words. Every detail was considered, and every decision was rooted in years of experience navigating Hollywood's intense scrutiny. And while the preparation might seem meticulous, or even excessive, the result was seamless. To the audience, it appeared natural, casual, effortless, but in reality, it was strategic artistry at its finest. What's more intriguing is how Dakota's intent intersected with Meghan's public image. Meghan had built her persona around grace under pressure, poise in public, and careful navigation of perception. Titles, appearances, charitable work, all were part of a polished narrative designed to maintain admiration and respect. But Dakota's subtle observation pierced that narrative. It wasn't about derision or insult. It was about exposing the human vulnerability beneath the public image. In other words, Dakota's preparation wasn't just for effect. It was a deliberate act of illumination, a way to hold up a mirror to a world obsessed with perfection. Backstage, producers were aware of the potential for tension. They had briefed both Dakota and Meghan on the general flow of the conversation, but could not, and would not, script the